Among the numerous psychological types identified by Carl Gustav Jung, there exists one that stands out not only for its uniqueness, but also for the depth of its inner dynamics, the introverted intuitive. Jung considered this personality one of the most enigmatic difficult to understand both for others and for the individual themselves. This type is not oriented by the world of direct action, external events, or easily accessible emotions. On the contrary, they live immersed in an inner universe, attuned to symbols coming from the unconscious, guided by visions, premonitions, and archetypal structures that are beyond the reach of the common gaze. The functioning of this type does not follow linear reasoning, nor is it based on tangible experience. Their direction is profoundly internal. They recognize meanings even before they take form, capture psychic tendencies at the moment they are still insinuating themselves, guided by an exceptional sensitivity to what remains hidden. The concrete everyday, with its pragmatic demands and conventional logic, often sounds to them like something tedious or secondary, not out of disdain or detachment, but because their attention is permanently turned toward another sphere, the symbolic domain, where the future often already shows its contours. For them, material events are merely manifestations of something more significant in the process of gestation. Carl Jung characterized this type as someone capable of capturing what is to come, even before it takes form or manifests in the external world. This is a perception focused on potential, on what is still in the process of gestation in the collective unconscious. Therefore, the introverted intuitive usually perceives signs of cultural, spiritual, or existential changes long before they become evident to others. However, this exceptional sensitivity comes at a price. The external universe follows a different rhythm, demanding concrete explanations, tangible results, verifiable data, and much of what this type intuits remains, at first, invisible and impossible to prove. A profound mismatch then arises between what they perceive internally and what society expects to hear. Often, their perceptions are discredited, underestimated, or even seen as strange. They are the person who senses important changes when meeting someone, who detects tensions before conflicts happen, who anticipates endings while everyone else is still caught up in the unfolding of events. But when trying to share these intuitions, they usually encounter indifference or distrust. Over time, they learn to keep their inner universe to themselves, making it a protected and inaccessible territory to others. When silence becomes shadow, it is in this unshared silence that the real danger lies. Jung warned, if the introverted intuitive does not find ways to manifest their inner images through dialogue, creation, experience, these visions not only lose their potential, but can become sources of torment. The inner universe, which could be a source of self-knowledge, runs the risk of becoming a territory of isolation and confusion. When symbols and premonitions are not welcomed by consciousness, they can gain autonomy and influence the individual involuntarily. Instead of being the subject of their experience, the person feels hostage to these forces, as if living at the mercy of contents they themselves do not fully understand. This is where Jung's warning makes sense. The gift of intuition, without expression or balance, can trigger processes of dissociation and suffering. The inner journey. In this content, I invite you to dive into this journey. We will unravel the dynamics of the introverted intuitive, the specific dangers they face, and mainly the potential for change and fulfillment when they find paths of expression and integration. The journey of this psychological type is full of challenges, but also of possibilities for deep understanding, not only for those who carry this profile, but for all who are interested in the mysteries of the soul and human experience. Intuition turned inward. In Jung's typological model, intuition is one of the irrational functions of the psyche, a way of perceiving realities that does not depend on logic or physical senses. For the introverted intuitive, this function acquires a profoundly internalized tonality. Unlike the extroverted intuitive, who directs their perception outward, seeking possibilities, trends, and opportunities in the world around them, the introverted intuitive turns their attention to the internal universe. They access contents that spring from the most ancestral and symbolic layers of the unconscious, often without any warning or rational explanation. Jung saw this function as an ability to capture originary mental images, symbols not yet transformed into ideas, emotions, or actions. Those who carry this psychological type often feel they see with the eyes of the soul, absorbing impressions and meanings invisible to the common gaze, reading invisible realities. While a situation may seem simple or trivial to others, for the introverted intuitive, it can be loaded with hidden nuances, silent patterns, or deep tensions. Their mind acts like an internal radar, capturing signals that escape language but express intensity and psychological meaning. When well utilized and integrated, this sensitivity is a source of great insight and creativity. People of this type perceive the symbolic value of events, decipher others' unconscious motivations, and often anticipate trends before they manifest clearly. In contrast, such sensitivity can lead to the risk of internal dispersion. Since it is common for this type that the sensation function, the one that anchors the individual to the present and to the body, is poorly developed, there is a tendency to distance themselves from the concrete. Intuition then becomes autonomous, promoting a constant dive into internal worlds, sometimes at the cost of contact with objective reality. The internal universe. The inner universe of this personality is not the result of chance, nor is it a territory totally under the domain of reason. Images and symbols emerge according to the needs of the psyche, and not simply by one's own will. When channeled consciously, these manifestations can be the origin of inspiring creations, innovative solutions, and profound understandings. However, when not recognized, they can accumulate as excess internal stimuli, generating confusion, dispersion, and weakening the ability to act rationally. At this stage, life experience shifts from the concrete to a subjective space where everything feeds back on its own perceptions. The challenge of the introverted intuitive is to unravel how their intuition operates, learning to distinguish between authentic insights and fantasies disconnected from reality. This process requires discernment, introspection, and building a solid internal foundation. But a warning is worth noting. However seductive it may be to inhabit this symbolic universe, it presents its own traps. Next, we will discuss these dangers, especially the point where inner images, deprived of expression in everyday life, progressively migrate toward delirium. The boundary between inspiration and illusion. Introverted intuition stands out for operating in a unique temporality. It is not rooted in the present, but is oriented toward what is yet to happen. Its gift lies in capturing signals of what is about to emerge, in lying in wait for movements not yet materialized. The introverted intuitive thus traverses the threshold between now and future time, perceiving the birth of trends or archetypes long before they materialize. This capacity, according to Jung, gives them an almost prophetic aspect. They perceive beyond the visible surface of the world. However, this brings a dilemma. What they glimpse is often untransmittable, and what they feel remains beyond the reach of objective validation and recognition by others. This mismatch generates a persistent internal conflict. On one side, there is the intimate certainty of perception, on the other, the lack of external acceptance. In many cases, the introverted intuitive ends up doubting themselves or, defensively, isolates themselves in their visions, creating distance from the real world. The tension between two worlds, when the invisible that is perceived conflicts with the visible world that denies it. a silent tension begins to undermine the psychic structure. Jung cited, among his striking examples, the account of a patient who, in session, described seeing a tree rooted within herself, whose branches and roots expanded as therapy progressed. In the end, this tree bore golden fruit, something apparently fantastical, but which, for Jung, perfectly symbolized the integration of repressed internal contents and the renewal of psychic life itself. Many might dismiss such an image as mere delusional invention. However, Jung saw in it a vivid portrait of the transformation process promoted by introverted intuition. Symbolic images function as a map of the unconscious, showing the path of individuation in a way that words cannot. The danger arises when such images find no channels for expression, whether through speech, art, or conscious choices. When intuition closes upon itself without expression, inner vision can become a trap. What was once a source of transformative revelations becomes a source of isolation and confusion. The mind loses the ability to discern where insight ends and illusion begins. What would have healing power converts into delirium. The boundary between revelation and reverie is tenuous, and the introverted intuitive crosses this delicate line daily. Knowing the mechanisms that lead to psychic isolation is vital to maintaining sanity and transforming symbols into bridges, not walls. The profile of the introverted intuitive. By structure, not by choice, this type tends toward isolation. They turn to what is not immediately visible, the movements of the unconscious, premonitions, images that translate future possibilities. However, without channels to connect to the external world, identity crises arise, or, in more severe cases, fantasies of power and grandeur, a process Jung called inflatio. When the ego inflates and loses itself in archetypes, confusing itself with forces greater than the person themselves. The danger of inflated symbols. This phenomenon happens almost without being noticed. The introverted intuitive, upon perceiving deep patterns and internal signals, may begin to believe they are destined for a special role. That legitimate perception of being different crystallizes into a fantasy of superiority. Quickly, the individual sees themselves as the holder of great truths, owner of a vision misunderstood by the world and persecuted for seeing beyond. All criticism is interpreted as others. Blindness and isolation ceases to be suffering to become distinction. No one understands me because I am unique. Dissolution of personal boundaries. This type of inflation threatens self-criticism. The symbolic universe comes to be taken as absolute truth, and discernment between myth and reality is lost. The individual merges with archetypal characters, the prophet, the guru, the martyr, and abandons the experience of common life. Relationships become utilitarian. The everyday loses importance, and the gaze of the other no longer serves as counterpoint, but as threat or indifference. Internal fragmentation. The result of this process is psychic fragmentation. Intuition, once a source of meaning, becomes an instrument of escape. The self disperses into fantasies without roots in the real, and consciousness is colonized by unconscious contents. Existence moves in a private universe, full of symbols and narratives imprisoned in themselves, where everything is felt, but nothing is actually lived. The path of symbolic integration. However, not every dive into the symbolic results in delirium. The antidote lies in expression, giving form, sound, or gesture to these inner visions, translating the invisible into creation, whether art, word, music, or practice, allows transforming destructive energy into a tool for development. For Jung, symbolic externalization is vital. More than aesthetic, it is a necessity of the soul. By giving contour to the symbol, the introverted intuitive crosses the boundary of isolation and reconnects with the real world, converting inner vision into creative power and capacity for true communication. From solitude to communication. The introverted intuitive type has, in their trajectory, the challenge of transforming the experience of solitude into creative dialogue. When they find appropriate channels to express what pulses internally, they transform what would be isolation into a movement of encounter. In this process, the pain of inadaptability converts into communicative potential, and personal symbols gain body through art, writing, or innovative discourse. In this way, previously incomprehensible experiences become raw material for the collective. History remembers examples like Emily Dickinson, who transformed the silence of her seclusion into revolutionary poetry, or Frida Kahlo, who painted not only her own suffering, but also new perspectives on human experience. The bridge between worlds. Creative expression is, essentially, a bridge between dimensions. What was invisible and private becomes a bridge to new shared experiences. When the internal symbol is only accumulated or repressed, it creates mental dams and subjective illnesses. But when it gains form in the world, vision ceases to be a solitary burden and converts into contribution, resignifying feeling itself. Creating is building spaces of transit between interiority and common reality. It is not just about gift, but about conscious crossing that allows both self-knowledge and approaching the other. The symbolic act, then, reorganizes the psyche, integrating scattered fragments and inaugurating new forms of coexistence. The need for grounding. However, the symbol only reveals its true potential when it finds ground in the real. Without concrete practices, insights can be lost in the imaginative flow, generating restlessness or alienation. Contact with simple rhythms, caring for the body, creating routines, engaging in everyday tasks, offers the introverted, intuitive ballast against the excesses of the symbolic world. Grounding is what prevents creative talent from unfolding into compulsion or escape. The symbol that anchors in the body transforms into an instrument of presence, not just transcendence. The intuitive function and its integration. The essential challenge is the conscious integration between intuition and sensation. The intuitive function, with its dive into the deep waters of the unconscious, needs the anchor of sensation to not get lost in reveries. When body and imagination work together, space opens for a living and full presence. Jung proposed precisely this path, developing the least accessed function as counterweight to the dominant one. Thus, introverted intuition fulfills its role of inspiring and innovating, but with solid roots in everyday experience, protecting the individual from internal storms and promoting true realization. The sensation function as antidote. The sensation function represents the invitation to slow down and perceive the world directly, without abstract mediations. It anchors us to the ground of existence, invites the introverted intuitive to experience routine through touch, smell, direct contact with the real. Cooking food, feeling the texture of fabric, perceiving the rhythm of breathing. These are experiences that bring thought back to the body. For those who live in the domains of the symbolic and imaginary, sensation acts as a protective boundary. It is the reminder that life happens, first of all, in flesh and senses. Thus, cultivating the sensation function is, for the introverted intuitive, a form of self-care and regeneration. The return to the body. Turning to the body is like returning to a house that was always there, but was rarely inhabited. Small habits, like paying attention to walking, deliberately feeling the taste of food, or dedicating a few daily minutes to deep breathing, function as portals of presence. It is not about denying the value of the inner universe, but about establishing solid bridges between inner visions and the territory of the everyday. This balance brings a radical reconfiguration. Internal symbols cease to be traps and become practical allies. The introverted intuitive begins to act in the world from their depth, with more grounded choices and less ethereal decisions. Daily rituals. Daily rituals are microstructures that offer meaning, regularity, and containment to the fluid universe of intuition, making the bed with intention, taking a long bath, lighting incense when starting the day, picking herbs in the garden. Each gesture can transform into a symbolic act of integration. It is in these silent and simple rituals that imagination finds a safe container. By creating regularity and reverence in the everyday, the individual remembers the value of the present, facilitates the digestion of symbols, and prevents the excess of fantasy that can disorganize experience. The final confrontation. When all this internal and external work is done, one great challenge still remains: staying true to one's own essence amid a culture that values only the tangible and statistical. The introverted intuitive must learn not to remain silent, even in the face of indifference or scorn. In this clash between individual sensitivity and social expectations lies true courage, sustaining one's own inner vision without isolating oneself, maintaining the bridge with the world without giving up what pulses in the depths. Only thus does intuition manifest as a genuine source of transformation, for oneself and for the collective. The constant tension. For the introverted intuitive, there is a permanent conflict between the need for internal authenticity and the pressure of external conformity. They perceive nuances, symbols, and hidden meanings where others see only the obvious, but frequently feel forced to adjust their perceptions to avoid judgments and rejection. This tension manifests in hesitation to take positions, in discomfort before superficialities, and in the sensation of being constantly foreign even in close circles. This dichotomy occurs not only in major choices, but infiltrates the subtle gestures of everyday life. The shy smile before banal topics, silence when hearing ideas contradicting their intuition, or self-censorship in conversations to avoid being seen as strange or dramatic. The silent resistance, however, this internal clash, need not result in self-annulment. Jung highlighted that real individuation requires accepting contradiction, sustaining internally the truth of one's own symbolic universe while facing the weight of collective norm. Resisting, in this context, is not openly confronting the world. It is remaining faithful to one's own invisible compass, even when this means walking alone. It is a type of resistance that is made in silence, keeping a secret diary, dedicating oneself to small gestures of creativity, cultivating private spaces where the invisible can flourish without being judged. It is these moments of internal coherence that strengthen the psyche and prevent corrosion of the self, the act of transformation. In a society oriented by utilitarianism and spectacle, living according to one's own symbolic center is an act of profound originality. It is not about imposing one's visions on others, but about allowing the singular way of perceiving to discreetly transform environments, reveal hidden meanings, and inspire new questions. When this type of individual expresses their authenticity, even if in minimal doses, in authentic dialogues or simple choices, their presence instigates changes. Small acts of truth can provoke openings in those around them, awakening what, in the collectivity, is still asleep. The continuous journey. If, while walking, you feel the weight of being different, or guard intuitions that the world does not recognize, remember, the search for belonging is not the end of the journey. Cultivating coherence between inner world and external life is work for the entire existence, which asks for constant reinvention. With each small victory over external pressures, the soul strengthens. Reflecting on this tension is only the beginning. It can open doors to even more self-knowledge and, over time, help find peers, communities, or contexts where the invisible also has its legitimate space.